Faza'il A'maal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, White Elephant, Part 1.
Some people say, oh, Tablighi Jamaat people, oh, they narrate only weak hadith. That's not the right, that's not the true, brothers.
Here we have a whole new series dealing with the al-Hadith / Sunnah found within the widespread book known as Faza'il A'maal or Faza'il A'maal. Now, what I want to do in this series is I want to systematically go through a thesis that was submitted to the University of Birmingham by an author called Younis Al-Turkistany, and he submitted this thesis based upon the research that he did in the year 2011 about the Faza'il A'maal or the Tablighi Nisab. The technical title of the hadith thesis is A Critical Hadith Study of the Tablighi Nisab and its Intellectual Impact on the Jama Tabligh. Younis Al-Turkistany, University of Birmingham, Ph.D. in Islamic Studies, January 2011. Despite that, what I'm going to do is also give you information from other sources of hadith available in the English language. And there are, I would say, dozens of different quality sources on hadith methodology, hadith research and literature. I'm just going to open this door, and then the job of the individual who is listening to these videos is to research for themselves. I cannot go through the other works, but I feel it's pointless just to give you a critique of the Faza'il A'maal and tell you to not read that book and not give you something else to read in place of Faza'il A'maal. So I have a two-pronged approach. Number one, I will show you why you should not be reading Faza'il A'maal and it should be banished from all mosques. And I will also, on the second aspect, I will also tell you why you can find other literature that is worth reading and is worth looking at in order to understand what hadith is. So, in this first part, I'll just give you the abstracts that the author composed and also a little spillover into the literary or the literature review, because even from the outset, the approach and the mindset of the cult followers of this movement and the cult ideologues of this movement is quite clear for all to see. They are clearly blind followers of their sect, and they do not care for looking at a critical means or critical method of critiquing their own sect. They're very inward-looking isolationist. So he states in his abstract the following: it is common knowledge that movements are based on ideologies that are considered to be the foundation of their methodologies and policies. Often these ideologies are disseminated in letters, books or other publications that present them in the form of texts that are available to the public and become sources of information about these movements. Then he goes on and talks about the Jama Tabligh, the TJ as I've called them in two other series. The TJ is a movement based upon Dawah, and its primary or one of the most popular books of the movement is in Urdu is called Tablighi Nisab, and it's written by a man called Sheikh Muhammad Zakaria al-Kandahlawi, and it was first published in the Urdu language in 1955. Thereafter it's been translated into several languages. He mentions later on in the thesis that it's more than 10 languages, and it has numerous errors. In fact, he makes a good claim to show that more than 56% or 56% of it is fabricated, baseless and weak. Then he says that he has 6 chapters to this thesis. The first is the introduction, and the last is the conclusion, and in between he talks about, in chapter 2, what weak hadith are, the different types and categories. Then in the third chapter he deals with the biography, Muhammad Zakaria Kandahlawi, and the fourth chapter focuses upon the Tablighi Nisab itself, the editions and the translations, and the fifth chapter is a critical study of the ahadith present in the book. And this book is useful in that Faza'il A'maal is useless, but the thesis that I'm studying is useful in the sense that it critically analyzes this group and critically analyzes this sect. That's the abstract. That's where we're going with this whole new series. And to give you some beneficial knowledge after I've given you some introductory notes, I'll also give you one quote that is found on page 7 that tells you the mindset and shows you the mindset of Kandahlawi himself. So here on page 7 it says, this is a book from the literature review. It's called Kutub Fada'il par Ishkalat or Unke Jawabat, which is Muhammad Zakaria Kandahlawi's response to the critiques of the weakness found in this book. And this was published in 2001. And it says, this gives Zakaria's own point of view regarding certain criticisms and questions about his book Tablighi Nisab. And the author, Turkistany, says this is one of the main strengths of Kutub Fada'il, is the defense of Sheikh Muhammad Zakaria himself. So this book is from the author's mouth himself, defending his critiques. For example, he defends some weak hadith and insists on maintaining them despite numerous demands to remove them from the book of Tablighi Nisab. This is Kandahlawi for you, Muhammad Zakaria for you. Even though he's told numerous times to remove these weak hadiths, he continues and maintains and insists that these hadith should stay within the book. That should be a red flag straight away. Enough of Tablighi Nisab. What I will give you now is one of the most long-standing works available in the English language, and it's written by a scholar called Al-Azami, also pronounced. And Al-Azami is useful in the sense that he did his doctoral dissertation, and his doctoral dissertation was called Studies in Early Hadith Literature with a Critical Edition of Some Early Texts. Azmi M.M., University of Cambridge, 1967. And I recall reading this thesis in full, and when I looked for the quote again, I couldn't find the quote, but he actually stated in the introduction that another scholar was refused to do this thesis, and the scholar's name was Al-Masri, Al-Masri, and I actually did a bit of research and actually found that in fact 1 year before, Masri wasn't refused to do this sort of topic. In fact, he did do this topic, and I have actually held that thesis in my hands when I was at the University of Cambridge, and it was called An Introduction to the Study of the Traditional Criteria Used in the Criticism of Hadith. So this is one of the earliest works. It will be very hard to find this work of Al-Masri, but the work of Al-Azami is very easily available. In any case, Azami wrote another book, which was another basic book related to the study of Hadith, and it was called Studies in Hadith Methodology and Literature. And if you look into the links below in the description, I will give you links to all of these PDFs and all of these books, so you can read good, useful Hadith literature and come to a critical, honest understanding of what this science and what this study is. He states, and I'll just give you a basic introduction from him, or a basic overview from him. He states in the first part of this basic book, not the Ph.D. thesis, the basic book, Studies in Hadith Methodology, about what exactly Hadith and Sunnah is. So here is the page. I'm not going to read it all for you. You should pause it, read, grasp, apply, persist, and achieve. He basically states that the Arabic word hadith literally means communication, story, conversation, religious or secular, or historical or recent. And when it's used as an adjective, it means new. So something new is hadith. And it's been used in the Quran 23 times. Then he gives a distinction. He tells you what sunnah is, because these words are interchangeable. And he says about sunnah, in Arabic literature, especially in early hadith fiqh books, it's used with different meanings, such as shar'iyya, an established non-compulsory religious practice without it being fard, which means obligatory, or wajib. And it's also used that which is proved by means of sunnah, one of the four sources of law. It's also called tariqat ad-din, so a model behavior of the Prophet. And then it's also, he explains in a little later on, he explains how these terms are used interchangeably and how he will use them in his work interchangeably. So that's basically what hadith is. It's a narration, a report, and that's what sunnah is. It's a practice, and the terms can be used interchangeably. I'm sure as this series goes on, I will flesh that out with much more detail. Stay tuned for many more parts.